Hello, my name's Oliver Pickup. I'm a technology and business journalist, and I'm delighted to be here with Nick Rutter, who is Chief Product Officer at FireAngel, a company that's sold 70 million devices since 1998, and Paul Cook, who is Interim Health and Safety Manager of Ealing Council. It's great to have you both here, and we're here to discuss fire safety of the future and connected communities and smarter, safer cities. So perhaps we'll start the discussion. Nick, in an ideal world, how will the smart cities of the near future, in say 20 years, look and feel from a fire safety perspective?
I think the change in technology opens up massive scope for improvement by being able to connect together a whole host of different devices. It gives fantastic insight into what's happening in a situation, which allows fires to potentially be more accurately pinpointed, and also importantly for nuisance alarms to be more accurately rejected. So that will improve the accuracy of the type of alarms that as manufacturers we can produce. And by the application of technology like AI, we're able to move from a space of we've got passive fire safety to ensure things aren't flammable at the moment. We use active fire safety like alarms in order to get people alive out of fire situations. However, by employing predictive technology, we're able to use technologies like AI to potentially prevent fires even happening in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, I mean, we're thinking about what it might look like in 20 years' time, but it's amazing to think the development that we've seen in the last 20 years, isn't it? From your perspective, you know, could you talk a little bit about that and say where we are now and also look further ahead?
Yeah, I think we've gone from a place where a smoke alarm was a very basic item that was installed in every property to the rollout that we're doing at the moment, where we've got perhaps 10 smoke detectors in every room of the property, and they're all linked together, and it's given us this real-time data around not only fire and the presence of smoke, but also some really early indicators of behaviours in the property, starting to indicate some vulnerabilities that people might have. Nick's already touched on AI and predict. I think as things move forward, we will stop to just focus on the fire safety side of it, and we'll start to pull together data from perhaps the smoke detectors, perhaps from our utility metering, perhaps from boiler data, and start to get that more holistic feel, I suppose, about what's going on in the property, rather than focusing on individual systems.
And thinking about how this technology might empower communities to look after members of the community more. I know that you've recently bought quite a few FireAngel devices.
We have.
Which will help with that flexibility and scale of connectivity. Could you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Ealing's got just over 14,000 homes within its portfolio, and we've embarked on a programme to install connected devices in every one of those over the next 3 years. The aspiration is that we will monitor where people are comfortable with doing that, all of the devices, but also we will encourage residents to sign up to use the app to be able to monitor devices in their own home, and perhaps where people have vulnerabilities to allow carers or loved ones to respond to fire events or abnormal stuff that goes on with them.
And well, I suppose we can have all the technology we want, but we want to change behaviours, so having that community connectivity is important, isn't it, Nick? So you can almost sort of raise the flag if there's a problem.
Yes, I think in the past, and particularly the fire safety sectors, really come at the challenges from an engineering perspective. However, you've got to think about the users, and solutions need to be user focused in order to ensure that they are adopted and then they're continuously used once they are adopted. And that type of technology, like the app that Paul mentioned, is exactly the type of technology that can engage with the users and engage with communities, because there is a desire for communities to look after each other. It's something that's innate in all of us. And as societies maybe become more disparate over the past kind of 50 years, that's become more challenging. However, this is exactly the type of technology that can help knit that together.
I think recent statistics say that to the year June 2021, there were just under 250 fatalities in Great Britain through fire, and that number's been about the same for the last few years, hasn't it? But I mean, I think it's a similar number for automotive deaths as well. Do we need to? Can we get it down to zero? Do you think, Nick? What needs to happen?
Yeah, I think if you look at the road traffic deaths are actually significantly higher, but if you look over the last 20 years as a percentage, they've both decreased by about 55%. However, if you look at road deaths, there's a huge amount of technology that's being employed either at a road level or at a vehicle level in order to drive that number continually down and not be satisfied that it's just going to plateau. And I think as a sector, we within fire need to adopt exactly that kind of approach, because as you get closer to zero, and particularly because of the demographic in the UK, and particularly with an ageing population, and with ageing there's a higher potential of issues like mobility issues and mental health issues such as Alzheimer's, it gets more and more challenging to drive that number down. Yet we can't give up on that vision of driving towards zero.
This idea, could you talk, Paul, about this idea of the golden thread, which I think has sort of been spawned by the Grenfell tragedy, this sort of idea of having data on buildings, and how that might develop?
Yeah, so a part of that golden thread is having this data flow, I think, for the life of our buildings, and that's talking about, you know, from the strategy, the design, the construction, the commissioning, the management, right through to the eventual demolition of the building, and maintaining the integrity of that data throughout the building's life. It's a huge piece of work to start to collect data for buildings that already exist. I think one of the advantages of installing tech like connected smoke detectors and other monitoring stuff is it's a benefit. It's there in the background. It's a value-added thing. By installing devices in a methodical way, by capturing images of them once they're installed, by recording their positions, their locations, the test data, it just kind of happens in the background. It isn't like a lot of our other building services where we need to send somebody out to survey them, to record in the logbook. It's just there. So I think it will form a critical part of that golden thread. And
I suppose part of that, I think 40% of the call-outs that fire and rescue services had last year were false alarms, essentially. So hopefully better data, better technology will help reduce that?
I think partly. So I think the 40% is predominantly relating to commercial type fire alarm systems, and obviously exponentially there's a huge number, it's a far greater number of domestic smoke detectors that currently aren't monitored. So I think there is a risk at the moment that if you started to monitor domestic smoke alarms in the same way as we do commercial systems, there would be a huge increase in unwanted fire signals for the fire service, which would in all likelihood decrease their response because they haven't got the resources. But by building in AI, like we've talked about, by looking at fire history or detector activation history within properties, equally making sure that devices are installed correctly by competent people who have been trained and put them in the right places, we can reduce the likelihood of those unwanted fire signals, and then hopefully the fire rescue services can target their response and start to deploy themselves to domestic smoke alarm activations.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, Nick, about how we mentioned the app before, how apps might develop. And you're a product man. What do sort of customers want? How do you make it user friendly and intuitive?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. We know from the Grenfell inquiry and numbers of reports around fires that communities, for example, have adopted WhatsApp because that is something that people tend to use. It's very, very familiar to them. It's very flexible with the way it can be used, and it's very good to use in a group environment. And I think it shows that there is a desire there to build that community, to use technology to do that. And I think as manufacturers, that's part of the challenge, that how do we give that type of functionality but integrated into the system to give the value and to give the insight And one of the areas that makes IoT really, really interesting about fire is there are so many interested stakeholders. There aren't many sectors of IoT where there are so many interested stakeholders, such as obviously building management, but maintenance, fire and rescue service, friends, family, neighbours. The list can go on and on and on. And this is what makes it so well suited. And creating technologies to allow all those different groups as necessary to work together is the challenge that we're working towards.
And you know, IoT is obviously sort of transforming things. I know you've been working on it for almost a decade now, but give us an idea, Paul, of the kind of detail that is the level of detail that's enabled by IoT. Maybe it might be checking maintenance of boilers or doors or whatever.
So yeah, I mean, as it stands at the moment, we've focused on the smoke detectors, and that's predominantly to enable us to know that systems are in place and they're working, they haven't been removed or tampered with, and to have a record that they've been tested. The bolt-on, I think, for us was the predict and the IoT functionality that AI functionality that enables us to, predict fire behaviours. We're looking at rolling out some boiler controls next. I think on the commercial side or on the consumer side, the boiler controls are driven as a convenience piece. For us, it's the back end. It's being able to extract fault data from those boilers, to be able to identify potentially parts that might be required to enable the engineer to go to site and undertake a fix first time. The knock-on for that is that the resident is comfortable quicker. We make less appointments. The resident has to take less time off work. It's those bits that I think, certainly from the social housing perspective, is where it varies from perhaps a consumer product.
It's a great answer. And just thinking about how this might develop, do you think there's an area that where the great innovation is needed? Perhaps it's not necessarily technology. Perhaps it's something around collaboration or actually interacting with people.
I think one of the mistakes I think organisations often make when they look at IoT is they say, "Oh, fantastic, we can suddenly have all this data." And most organisations just don't want any more data. They don't need that data. And the beauty of well-designed and well-thought-through IoT systems is that they provide you insight rather than just providing you data. Because what all organisations want from an organisational perspective is they need to use their constrained resources as effective as possible, and that's why systems that give you insight and action rather than just flooding you with data are exactly what you need. And exactly the same is true from a community perspective. You can't just flood people with information. You need to use the technology in order to do the filtering in an automatic way and give them that insight and give them that action in a way that's very, very easy to digest.
I think it's a fair point. We still haven't created, I don't think, the bandwidth to manage all of the data from these different sources internally. So, whilst the FireAngel product does that for the smoke detector systems and tells us who's at risk, we're not necessarily taking that data and merging that with stuff from our repairs data or our boiler data, which again would give us a new data set around property asset age or vulnerability of residents and stuff like that. So I think we're still, it's good this stuff's coming in, but we're still not even now maximising that.
It does, yeah. It does feel as though you're sort of very much at the start of this journey, and I know that kind of interoperability is the sort of end goal and very exciting. But perhaps there's something around the attitude to fire and safety that needs to change in healthcare. That if someone sees a problem, they flag it, and there's a sort of almost automatic intervention. Is the same true in fire safety at the moment?
I don't think we're there yet. I think we've done a lot of work on training our installers and training our housing officers and other staff who are out in the community to do that kind of first-time reporting. But there's still a lot of stuff slips by that shouldn't. I think this system will help to identify those behaviours that are going on kind of in the background in people's homes, and hopefully we'll prompt a visit from a professional to go in and intervene, whether it's housing officer, whether it's the fire service on a home fire safety visit. but yeah, there's definitely still more to do there.
And thinking, Nick, about the kind of other challenges while we're trying to create the sort of safer houses, particularly sort of social housing, what do you foresee being the biggest problems?
I think one of the biggest challenges is just the age of the housing stock. 60% of the UK social housing stock was built before 1980. So we were talking about cutting edge technology that has only been around for maybe, a few years, and the role of technologies every 10 years, every 7 years, every 3 years. And yet we're talking about buildings that on average are over 40 years old. So the challenge is about how we improve the safety of these buildings and raise them to the necessary standard, but through retrofit, because if we have to wait for that to be done through new build, we'll never make those improvements in our lifetime.
And I think it's a really good point, and it's topical at the moment, certainly with the climate change and carbon zero by 2030, because it isn't only about the safety, it is about making people comfortable in their homes, it's about making their homes affordable, sorting out issues with damp and mould. So it is this really complex puzzle, and safety is absolutely critical for people, but trying to integrate all of those things, I think this is where IoT has a big role to play, certainly getting feedback from some of those systems and helping us to engage with the residents living in those homes to do it effectively.
And I'm thinking about where people should put, let's say, their smoke alarms and other devices. It's got to be the kitchen, isn't it? I think 46% of fires are caused from the kitchen.
So, I mean, we're doing the highest level of detection that's possible at the moment. So it's an LD1 is the standard we've adopted. So we've got smoke detectors within every room of the property. If there's solar PV on the roof, we're putting them into the loft as well, and we've got heat detectors in the kitchen, and we've got carbon monoxide detectors. There isn't a space, I think, in the house that isn't covered. But part of that has inherent risks attached with it, because more devices, more likely false alarms and unwanted signals. So we've done a lot of work on installer training and assessing the competence of installers. We've even worked with FireAngel to develop the system so that engineers need to take photographs so we can evidence where devices have been placed and spot check to make sure these systems really are going to be as accurate as they can be.
Fantastic, very reassuring, I'm sure, for the residents there. And Nick, I mean, there needs to be, it seems to me, more collaboration between various sort of stakeholders here. How can we kind of build that?
I think it's evidencing the difference that it makes, providing that insight rather than just flooding them with information is absolutely the key with driving that. So they're getting relevant information, they can see the part that they play. And I think, touching on one of the previous points about the challenge of dealing with the number of nuisance alarms, dealing with vulnerable people within housing. I think the reason it's never been successfully challenged before is there hasn't been that insight. And I think the type of technology like the FireAngel Predict technology, which automatically gives organisations that stratification of risk, it allows them to know where they've got to focus. And by being able to focus on the right areas, if they're bringing partner organisations in, which could be social services, it could be fire and rescue service, because they know they're going to have a high hit rate, they're more likely to be able to engage with those partners.
I think it's a really valid point, and one of the dangers, I suppose, one of the potential barriers to this IoT is at the moment we don't have that level of data. We're not expected necessarily to respond to stuff that we don't know about. And all of a sudden you connect 14,000 plus new homes up and get 14,000 sets of data coming in every day. You've got to do something with it. And then add 14,000 boilers and 14,000 sets of emergency lighting and all of this. All of a sudden you need a whole new team of people just to filter through these responses. So being able to, I think without that, it's almost unhelpful. So for us, I think that certainly the Predict was the selling point that enabled us to install that, because otherwise, there is a risk we'd have collected so much data that we couldn't respond to. It wasn't worth having.
I suppose one of the worries that residents might have is what happens to their data. So what are you doing about data privacy, and you know, I appreciate that we're only at the start of this journey really. How might that develop?
I think it's a collaborative approach, and it's through consultation and consent with residents, and ensuring that people understand why we would like to capture the data, and what we want to do with it. We don't, you know, in terms of kind of normal principles, we don't want anything that is unnecessary, and we're only going to use it for the purpose that we've kept it for, and that is to keep an eye on the safety of the devices that are within their homes, and to enable us to respond to fix a fault. I think there is some research going on in this area elsewhere, and I don't think in the past we've necessarily got it right, and I think we have done things, we've installed stuff and told people we're going to do it, and we haven't engaged. And I think this is part of that journey, engaging with residents and giving people the confidence that we're collecting it for, you know, to help us to help them. So yeah, the data as it stands with the FireAngel product has been securely stored on Amazon Web Servers, and meets all the kind of tick box GDPR requirements. For me, the important bit is that engagement with residents, and as I say, giving them the confidence that it's, you know, we're doing it for the right reasons. We're not selling that data on.
And I suppose following on from that, Nick, how can we achieve a sort of more holistic approach?
I think when you're looking at residents, you've really got to look at their overall quality of life. Obviously, fire safety is an absolutely critical element of that. Carbon monoxide for gas safety is also a critical element of it. But you've got to look more broadly at factors that are going to improve that quality of life, such as the environments, the temperature and humidity within the property, the potential integration of technologies like care and protection technologies in order to take care of the most vulnerable people within our society. So it's going beyond and looking holistically to ensure that people's quality of life is improved, and through doing that, where you've got more vulnerable members of society, you're able to use the technology to level that up.
I think for me, we're looking at, you know, obviously all of those. We're looking at some stuff around utility monitoring as well, partly to help us make sure we can target residents with energy saving advice, so we can identify our poorest performing homes to look at prioritising those for retrofit programmes. There's also some kind of an interesting aside to this as well, that where we are able to capture either temperature and humidity data or perhaps utility data, we can start to look at occupancy within those flats and when people might be in. And that will help us then to do stuff like, when we're making appointments, do a proactive servicing visit to somebody's house. We can offer them an appointment time that's most convenient to them. We can reduce the number of no accesses that we get when we're going to do servicing or to install new smoke detectors, which, you know, creates a saving for the council, and ultimately means we can target how we spend our money and spend more of it on residents and, you know, where it's needed.
Well, I've found it a fascinating discussion, so thank you very much. I'm feeling a bit more reassured by the direction of travel. I hope the viewers enjoyed it too. Thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.